Hello, good morning and welcome. Lord Mandelson left Wandsworth Police Station at 1:15 this morning, arriving back at his Regent's Park home at about 2. He spent just over 8 hours in that South London nick. A seismic moment for British politics. My name is Anne McElvoy from Politico.
And I'm Sam Coates of Sky News. The image of the former ambassador being led away, thunder-faced by detectives in plain clothes wearing body cameras will be an image of our political age and one that will haunt Keir Starmer's Downing Street as it continues to count the cost of appointing the peer to one of the biggest jobs in government. Pear's previously denied any wrongdoing, said he didn't act for financial gain, as well as once, in an earlier age and in a different context, memorably declaring, "I am a fighter, not a quitter."
Different times. Lord Mandelson now out on bail as part of the criminal investigation into claims that he leaked market-sensitive government documents and possibly insider information during his time as business secretary in Gordon Brown's government in 2009 and 2010. That comes on top of the police searching his London home and a property he rents in Wiltshire, taking away laptops and boxes of documents.
We had a bit of a split screen moment last night because, as Harry Cole points out from The Sun, with exquisite timing, the new US ambassador, Christian Turner, had his welcome bash last night. He made no mention of the events in London involving his predecessor beyond saying it had been a difficult few months. Now, the arrest took place 3 days before the crucial by-election test for Keir Starmer in the Manchester suburb of Gorton and Denton, where the Prime Minister spent the day yesterday and where I was too and am today. I'm coming to you from Manchester this morning, and I can tell you that the arrest in an Levenshulme pub last night drew pretty much mockery and further derision towards Keir Starmer, but the drinkers I was talking to had already pretty much made up their mind how they were going to vote and didn't seem to need this additional piece of information to help them along the way. But before you ask, I did find people still prepared to vote every which way in Thursday's by-election, and yes, that still included Labour.
Well, that would be good news for a Labour MP campaigning in Gorton and Denton who texted me to say they were confident the Green vote, one of their biggest threats there, is soft, as they put it, and they think the Greens lack reliable data for targeting in these last days. But I have to say at this stage, everyone is going to tell their optimism story. So maybe we should listen to you down the pub instead. Even if Labour do scrape through on Thursday, a reprieve for Keir in those circumstances, there will be fresh questions about whether Lord Mandelson was, as Peter Kyle put it at the time, of someone he knew well, worth the risk to hand over the role of ambassador in December 2024, only for him to have to resign over ongoing links to the paedophile Jeffrey Epstein after Epstein's had been arrested. That happened in September last year. So the government is now committed to releasing tens of thousands of private documents related to the Mandelson case. And Sam, there's just likely to be a lot more insight into how the sausage of government gets made than it would welcome being shown in public at any time, let alone in this very sensitive and reactive context. So that starts next week. It could go on over months, as the most sensitive information will be held back as long as the police inquiry is ongoing. But then I think questions will arise about what is held back and what is brought into the public domain.
Yeah, there's just a sense of Number 10 having to fight on numerous fronts on this matter alone because there are so many different ongoing processes, so many things that are going to drag on over weeks and months connected with Lord Mandelson, making it very hard for the government to reset and move beyond. And look, in terms of the disclosure, which is undoubtedly going to be incredibly painful, it's going to be months before we see some absolutely critical documents, even documents that, Number 10 think might help their case. Amongst the documents now delayed is the 2-page due diligence report by the Cabinet Office detailing what Keir Starmer was told about Mandelson's relationship with Epstein before he appointed him. And this is critical because Keir Starmer's referred to this before, Mandelson's response to the questions that the Prime Minister asked him ahead of the appointment about Jeffrey Epstein. So all of the stuff that Keir Starmer references in interviews now being withheld for months. The Times publishing, reporting that they cannot be published before not only the conclusion of the police investigation, but also the conclusion of any criminal trial that could follow.
Gosh, yes, that does remind you how long this could all take to play out, doesn't it? In some ways, I suppose that preserves the Prime Minister and those close to him on that decision from having it all done perhaps as quickly as was initially thought it could be on the public domain. But it also means that the pain continues for a lot longer. More documents from a previous era also in the spotlight. The Liberal Democrats planning to use a humble address in the House of Commons to force the government to release papers related to Andrew Mountbatten-Windsor's appointment as trade envoy. He was in that role from 2001 to 2011. So that takes in the Blair, Brown and the very early Cameron eras. If it passes, there could be hundreds of thousands of papers that were flying about then, going to government ministers and from government ministers with their views on Andrew, input from other royals, and the role of background checks, which is the topic which keeps raising its head.
Yeah, we're kind of moving into a new parliamentary era where it appears possible to get documents forced out of government in a way that, certainly a few years ago, I never would have expected. This began in Brexit and has become a feature of our politics. And this is the Liberal Democrats using a bit of the time that they get to control Parliament, their opposition day motion today. And they will specifically ask for correspondence from Mandelson regarding the Andrew appointment. In an attempt, essentially what the Lib Dems want to do is work out ties between the two friends of Jeffrey Epstein, Mandelson and Andrew, because it is thought that Mandelson lobbied for Andrew's appointment as a trade envoy. So getting that into the open, I think, is Ed Davey's aim. So will it work? Well, I was messaging one pretty key member of the government last night about it all, about whether Labour could withstand such disclosure. And they just said, look, if I'm honest, I don't see how the hell anyone would vote against it. So it doesn't sound like the government are going to try and block it. It doesn't sound like they would have the numbers to stop it. So it sounds as if another mass disclosure of hundreds or thousands of papers is on its way. But I have to say a strong government wouldn't want this, even if it was about a previous era. And it's largely a Labour era. It is not going to be pretty. It never is. However much transparency is the kind of sunlight and disinfectant that Cameron once claimed it was.
And opening fires is kind of becoming the norm rather than the exception in these scandals, isn't it? And that's a big change to the system, given that we have a strong culture of confidentiality, if you want to be polite, or secrecy, if you think that government tends to try to hide away its business from the prying eyes of people like us. We're going to get such a lot of information dumped into the public domain. And yes, it may take longer if there is indeed a trial in the Peter Mandelson case. But usually we'd be waiting for 20-year rules for release of sensitive public records. I think there's still the question of what will be withheld on national security grounds. I was actually talking to people in some of the deeper parts of the deep state yesterday, and the discussion was that the bar would be set pretty high on that, and it can't just be embarrassment caused. It would need to be something that very directly affects sources or raises a clear security question. The big enchilada, Sam, for me is what the effect will be of all this on a weakened Prime Minister, and how are you seeing that?
So I see Keir Starmer struggling to get ahead of events. He needs to leap back onto the front foot to have a chance of facing down critics, of sort of clearing a path to to getting back to governing again. This week was meant to be about being on the front foot when it comes to policy, with the speech on all the measures on special educational needs yesterday, and a justice speech we'll talk about in a second today. But of course, that's been obliterated, blasted out of the water, and will continue. The Mandelson affair will continue to be a distraction for some time to come. But also, at the heart of it, for me, this is a story about how Keir Starmer had his doubts about Mandelson, but appeared to be convinced by the now departed advisor, Morgan McSweeney. Coming back to that question of, when can we rely on the Prime Minister really governing with his own instincts rather than subcontracting to somebody around him. It's that incredibly toxic sort of charge against Keir Starmer that he doesn't have his own politics, which lies at the heart of this. And this is an ugly reminder of that. So yes, it is an arrest of Peter Mandelson, but yes, this comes back again to Keir Starmer. Now, there's no immediate polling verdict on the arrest since this week's Sky Times YouGov numbers were all sampled before the arrest took place. But the current state of polling, last poll before the Gorton and Denton by-election, has Reform top on 24%, which is no change, a little bit off their peak of the last 12 months. The Conservatives and Labour tied on 18%, Greens on 17%, and Lib Dems on 14.
Looking at those figures, just coming back from Germany, the only logical conclusion is a grand coalition of the Conservatives and Labour, although I would not put your mortgage on that as an outcome. The first part of this week was meant to be a domestic policy blitz. Yesterday, the Send reforms, which we discussed on the podcast in detail. Sam, I know you've been doing a lot of work on that. Today is, ironically enough, Crime and Justice Day with David Lammy, possibly somewhat ill-timed, with the Deputy Prime Minister giving a big speech in London to lawyers and criminal justice professionals, where he'll address the critical uncomfortable truth, as he said to put it, that the UK justice system is failing victims and staff due to years of neglect and stalled evolution. Looks like he's going to use that kind of language to try and push along his changes, also knowing that there's quite a lot of opposition to that, particularly in the legal profession.
Yeah, there's something really interesting going on today and yesterday with kind of public policy. The one thing that links them both, I have to say, is that yesterday with the special educational needs reforms, it turned out that the government had found more money, even though Number 10 seemed a little confused about that earlier in the day. And the budget rose by 3.5 billion in 1 year in order to do that. So that was yesterday. And that was, by the way, on top of the spending review. Today, David Lammy is announcing that he's found more money too. The Justice Secretary plans to spend millions of pounds to enable Crown Court judges to sit for an unlimited number of days over the next 3 years. He's getting rid of the cap on Crown Court sitting days, effectively to make courts work harder to get through the backlog. But he also wants to halve the number of jury trials to reduce the 80,000 strong case backlog and tackle court delays of up to 5 years. So they have found more money for this as well. But the reason for the speech now, well, that's because tomorrow, Wednesday, the court's bill enacting those jury reforms is due to be published. And it doesn't have any changes. There's no U-turn at all. As Sarah Sackman, the courts minister, told us when we did our deep dive on the subject a few weeks ago, the government isn't backing down on jury trials. So stand by for a rebellion, stand by for a response from Labour MP Carl Turner, who's threatened to quit the whip and potentially stand down. And let's see how many of those former 60 Labour MPs who signed a letter objecting to curbs on jury trials stick with those objections, reflecting in part resistance from the criminal justice industry who don't like the jury trial curbs at all. So that is a marker being put down by the Deputy Prime Minister and Justice Secretary having found more money. Keir Starmer, I think, though, is going to be trying to float above it all today because he's back on the foreign policy beat, adopting the mantle of statesman, if at all possible, on the world stage above the domestic mess. What's he up to, Anne?
Well, it is the 4th anniversary of the Russian invasion of Ukraine, the full-scale invasion of 2022. Obviously, a grim date and one in which a virtual coalition of the willing meeting of Ukraine's allies will be held today to mark that. It's significant in a number of ways, Sam. It's the first since Britain and France signed a declaration to send troops to Ukraine if a peace deal is agreed. Yvette Cooper is in Kyiv also to show support on the ground there. Starmer co-chairing the meeting with Emmanuel Macron, France, to discuss plans in the event of a ceasefire. Now, I know that seems like a distant prospect, but I think the whole aim of that, whether it ever comes into being, is to show that there is a serious desire to support the security of Ukraine should Russia ever come to the table effectively with Donald Trump and with America on that. It's the multinational force, so-called 70 personnel already in place working on that. So it is beefing up, at least administratively, let us say, if no sign of your actual peace yet. Worth noting a couple of things are my Brussels colleagues' playbook reporting the 90 billion euro loan package to Ukraine, tough new sanctions for Russia, not yet in place. I mean, Hungary has been the holdout on that. But a lot of things are just still a bit slower to come on than I think they would have hoped by this anniversary. A lot of people have said to me, they need me to go back to the Kremlin website for our morning, and this seemed like the day to do it. And actually, I was somewhat surprised. I've just looked it up now. The Kremlin website was often very quiet on what's going on in Ukraine. It's absolutely full of propaganda-driven stories. The top item, Sam, is the meeting of Putin with widows of fallen heroes from the Special Operations Forces, which is what they call the forces invading Ukraine, wreath laying at the tomb of the unknown soldier, state decorations, and on it goes. Defender of the Fatherland Day, etc. What I would read from that, with my criminology hat on, is that there's no sign of Russia backing off this war. Indeed, if anything, it's beefing up there on that message of readiness to take real casualties for, as it would see it, or wants those in Russia to see it, and the defense of Russia in some way from having invaded Ukraine.
Well, that's really interesting, because that means that there's overlap from the case that's being made on the Kremlin website with the message that President Zelenskyy is trying to get out there today. He has given an interview to the Financial Times, and one of the cases he makes to the FT, and he uses Ukrainian intelligence assessments to do this, President Zelenskyy says that Russia's battlefield advances in the year 2025 cost an average of 167 people per kilometre of occupied territory. So while Russia is almost using the casualty rate as a symbol of the toughness and their ability to withstand what's coming, President Zelenskyy is sort of throwing it back at the West and saying this is a sign of Russian failure. I'm not sure that indicates that Zelenskyy has got a message, therefore, that is something that will worry those in Moscow. But he needs to continue to make the case in whatever way he can to ensure that Western attention does not dip off on that. Keir Starmer doing his business on Ukraine from London, but Foreign Secretary Yvette Cooper will be attending an official commemoration in Kyiv today, alongside Ursula von der Leyen from the European Commission as well. Our Beth Rigby, I think, is in Kyiv too. So expect lots of announcements on that later today.
And not to forget that the problem still remains for Ukraine, that whatever it is costing Russia, it is very difficult to see how it can mount a big counteroffensive, given the facts on the ground militarily right now. So that's where we leave it on a momentous day of that anniversary. And so much else going on abroad and on the domestic front as well, Sam.
That's right. I'll have a full update from Manchester's Gorton and Denton seat for you tomorrow, and let's see if any other bombshells emerge in the meantime. See you then.
Well, enjoy your hotel breakfast. That I do envy you.